All right, it's my privilege to introduce Connor Maley. And this is a bones-only biography written by the estimable Jonathan Franzen. Connor, unfortunately, lives squarely in a dank, shadowy corner of the fever dream named America, sequestered and drifting along the belly of planet Earth, also unfortunately, located 3 rocks out from the sun, a position from which he stares constantly at one very small section of the vast and unknowable skyscape, at what we can safely call our genetic star stuff, with envy and marvel. In the future, which is now and also over, he aspires to change one or both of these dire predicaments. Born deep in the Atlantic Ocean to the fore region of a beautiful, generous, biodiverse, and now bleached coral reef, whom he only remembers by the letter Z, and whose sole cognitive vice could be summated by the repetitive, but no less urgent and applicable phrase, breathe, 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 you stupid son of a bitch, open your eyes and breathe. He has since found dry land to be unsatisfactory and ultimately worth somehow transcending if transubstantiation is at all possible or even reasonable in the 21st century. In a direct response to and an investigation of this wearing dissatisfaction with the default stuff of a life, he writes fiction pathologically. And though he does not believe in God and so thus does not pray, nor does he expect anything remotely interesting to occur at either a molecular, cellular, and or conscious level once he dies, he does, per noctem, repeat to himself and think often of a few of the late Carl Sagan's sage words before or as the blankets are drawn and night is allowed its opportunity to do with us what it will, treating our limply lying bodies to a phantasmoric fate unreachable during the day. We are, each of us, a multitude. Connor Maley.
Thank you, Ashley. Ashley and I went to high school together, so we have a similar idea of what hell on earth is like. And thank you, Jonathan, who couldn't be here tonight. So I'm just going to, because it's kind of to reduce a list of persons deserving of thanks and gratitude to a small number of people is, I think, a little bit denying of our susceptibility as spongy people to sort of pick up on everything. I'm just going to run through the list of people with whom I've had class, spoken to, that I've picked up something on. First, my chair, Eric Olson, Anita, Amy Fan, Donna De La Perriere, Dodie Bellamy, Anne Marino, Cooley Windsor, John Lasky, Danielle Ellercombe, Randa Mellis, Adam Hazlitt, Claire Chafee, just all of whom I've been really, really pleased to be working with and learning from. The 2 captains here, Joseph Lees and Teresa Walsh, for keeping things afloat. The love of my life, Victoria de Blasi, without whom I would not be sane. Thank you all for, if nothing else, being fantastic human beings. I'm going to be reading from 2 excerpts, I'll be jumping around, from a story called Take Them Somewhere, Xanthus and Chroma, where the sea is near, the sun has absconded, and the stars fall like empires. Crushed, atomized, and crumbling mounds of sun-dried, broken glass-embedded dirt. The dust are the ghosts. Pitted underneath the churning tires of a pickup truck steaming at 75 miles per hour, far away from some darkened, one daytime-only stoplight, one grocery store desert town which might as well not exist on a map, made noises that can only be likened to lullabies for the ill-begotten, which nobody hears ever, but everyone, who among them has not heard or seen these road ghosts, who had ever spent a significant amount of time alone in a quiet corner of the earth knows about the nightmare soundtracks, the solitude tremors, the unignorable racket heard pacing and shouting in the mind of someone afraid for no good reason at all, when the recognition is conceded that while there may not be anything to fear but fear itself, which is mostly untrue, fear as a thing, in situ, is a terrifying, substanceless ogre. These lines, these interrupting refrains about dust and ghosts, are essentially all that's left and evidence of much of anything covered through the remains of this story. The lines, written in severe, painfully inscribed calligraphy in a script whose letters sometimes curlicue on for about 3 to 5 inches in width, all written on 8.5 by 11 sheets of parchment paper. 600 sheets of parchment held together by a nail with the tip heated and hammered to the side so the nail forms a clasping U shape. The document was found underneath the rubble of a Unitarian church toppled by a 5.7 earthquake near the tail end of the year 2016 at the corner of a small town in Baja, California, from which corner, if you were to visit the historic landmark rubble of the church, It had fallen and arranged itself in an apparently ecclesiastically important design, and pick up a copy of the reprinted text, complete with Gothic cover, and stay for a quick and lovely conversation with the distributor whose name is Raimundo and who supports his family off these very creepy booklets, or chapbooks as they call them in America, and then continue moving westward on Santa Rosaya just a little. The Pacific Ocean would start to hit your nostrils. Black-furred sea lions would be yawping, and you could spend all of about 10 minutes there on that shore reading with the 5-peso booklet in your sandy hands before feeling abhorrently alone and afraid of even the wind, of your own drawn-out heartbeat, convinced that nowhere is safe, that safety is, in short, one of the larger shams foisted upon mankind in the history of foisted shams on a public that is just omnivorously ravenous for them. The name at the bottom right-hand corner of the written documentation, poem, story, confession, and conceptual piece is Jesus Christ the 16th. Underneath the signature of the acronym in the words INDHSOM, iron nails don't have shit on me. Strapped by the grips of such a scathing fear in the bed of that truck, a custom Tyrian purple 1992 Mazda B2200, covered by a tightly stretched white tarpaulin whose front side proudly displays a top-to-bottom portrait of a quavering American flag, lie two youths panting, sweating, and afraid, a boy and a girl who are unsure if they are related but feel a connection, which connection they cannot describe beyond one-word textual type things like warmth and familiar and knowing and comfortable and touch, your touch. And in there with the two youths who were tied and bound, although no longer gagged on the far left side in ways not stringent enough to give them too much pain, but tight enough to keep them from moving and from entering any kind of calmness or understanding about the situation concerning where they were going, and inducing in them both a kind of dull, slowly benumbing pain felt as inflamed syringes entering each and every pore of skin and delivering bursts of antispasmodic medicine, is an elaborate and complexly ornate grandfather clock made out of beechwood, who insists her name is Grandma, with a sprawling buckshot wound located in terms of clock anatomy, the 10-foot tall clock tower's tummy or thoracic region, and who, the clock named Grandma, is spouting at random direct quotations and paraphrasings and apopthegms from every religious tract known to man, most of which come from the more arcane and recondite religious systems in which nobody believes or even remembers, and whose gods, goddesses, and prophets have long been axed, and some possibly non-existent religions, ones that won't exist for another 5, 6, 800, 1,000 years, when new helpless victims of insanity will be proclaimed as seers and guides, and all this given with a vaguely Nietzschean sense of phrasing, humor, and bleakness of vision, all these ramblings and shouts streaming out in a breathless and splintery voice that seems somehow appropriate for a vociferous, sententious grandfather clock who only occasionally steers into odium theologicum territory. Halfway through its phase, the moon was a gibbous tonight, fat and veiny even, with cracked ridges painting an arterial map across its cold, dry surface. But Jaromir and Ulia could only focus on the tarp covering them and hampering their respiration, confining and tightening the spaces around their lungs like freezer wrap. Ulia's insides pinched every few seconds near her spleen and liver, and her chest was under an enormous amount of pressure, which felt almost exactly like the way her mother and older brother would make her stand up straight against the wall and suck in her stomach until her ribcage became a sort of sideways, demented pipe organ. Rosalina assuming a rigid model-esque posture, her mother telling her to look bold, look fierce, look like a winner, look like those Lissom tall drinks of water in your class and in the auditioning locker rooms for those best American beauty television shows her mother dragged her to every few months, look like the young, barely humanoid figures on television and in newspaper pages in her brother's hands whom her mother needed her to look like, none of which Ulia knew how to do nor had any interest, but she did what she was told and suffered the respiratory consequences, not to mention a completely unhealthy relationship with mirrors or anything capable of reflections, a trait she shared with Jaromir, though neither knew it. For sure, these were memories away from which she was more than happy to be, no matter the agency or the force with which she was deracinated from her home or how hard her side ponytail had been clenched and yanked, but to have that intense, hyperfluid memory come steam-busting back in on her every time she tried to take in a full breath here on her back was a grueling bout of torture. Stop breathing, stop breathing, stop, she said aloud in broken, susurrus pleas. In the nanoscopic eyelets between the web meshing, Jaromir thinks he can see a meteor shower, and he keeps saying, look, look, look. The pauses between the words elongated so he can catch his breath, and Ulia thrashes her head, or thinks she does, from side to side, but her thrashing is in reality a glacial turning of her neck a centimeter one way followed by a centimeter the other way, to indicate no, I can't see it. How can you see anything? I don't believe you. But if she could, she would see that Jaromir is right. Surrounding and passing underneath the moon, the early Pleiades cut blinding grooves in the sky's dense but delicate fabric. Desperately seeking visions of something, Jaromir tries to tear his sight through the dielectric, heat-stealing canvas top, triple-stitched to ensure nothing escapes. He tries to welcome everything outside this truck onto him with a terrible force, is willing to be flattened by the sheer weight of the world out there that he can smell and hear and intuit but cannot see. The wind, the moon's bath, the creaking shingles of hut-like houses, the buzzing mosquito-killing and neon of motel signage, the chimes pealing, the ripened odor of saguaros and purple needlegrass, and the roar of the truck's engine, which is, for Jaromir, like the careless growl of a petroleum-drooling lion. He'd rather be swallowed by it all than stuck in here, uncertain and a tremble. He keeps hearing the shotgun blast again and again, and the ceramic explosion of imitation chinaware, none of which is as loud, could ever be as loud as the primal wailing of his mother, whose face is now his God. Most often he sees the bottom of the white canvas for what it is, impenetrable, stinking of chemical coating, rubber and dirt, the whiteness of which is inverted by the lack of light so that it appears slate, almost a soothing, comfortable color of darkness were it not for the way everything hurts, for the way he's terrified and feels as if he's losing his skin. Neither Jaromir nor Yulia feel violated in any sexual way that they can process, only those reoccurring conventional violations, the pain of a loved one causes, the darker and insidious pain a stranger causes with even a sidelong glance, although Jarmir's ass is in severe seizing pain, but he has no memory to account for it, and so he tells himself it was from when he fell on the cement porch outside his house, underneath the windsock, when he was dragged out, kicking and suffocating. Both Ulia and Jarmir's arms are bound to their waists, their hands forced into their pockets and wrists wrapped tightly against their knotty little hip bones by waist-size 42 leather belts, long loops of rope thick enough to support a tree swing, and their ankles are locked together via similar methods of bondage. Jaromir wiggles his fingers inside his empty pockets, where his body keeps them warm, and fuzzy bits of fabric tickle his hands, almost making him laugh, and even that insignificant movement of his extremities allows him to maintain those last levels of hope and belief that he was being escorted somewhere better, somewhere healthier, somewhere happier, and that where he was being taken by force. He knew that he was taken and handled roughly, and he knew what had been done to his house and to his family had been violent and rapacious, that the screaming and arguing going on in his house behind doors always closed to him implied, as ever, nothing even slightly propitious. But he couldn't understand any of it, who the person was barging in the house, what they were saying, or why, in the aftermath, he was being held down and bound, and so he needed to believe that he wasn't being taken somewhere frightening, that his life, what he understood of his life qua existence, wasn't in any kind of peril, that the concept of which he knew so little and heard and read about, but by which he was still utterly baffled, that is to say, death, was not in his particular deck of cards at this moment. Hearing his own breathing, he thought it a punishment, an annoying reminder of himself and the guilt he felt for almost rejoicing when he heard and saw the blurred movement of his father being struck by the intruder, feeling briefly like he was being saved. Hearing Yulia's, he thought it a benefaction, the breath, even the wheezing and the whimpering, and though her breathing, couldn't drown out the illuminating, bending howl of the wind, it offered up the bare possibility that there was something else to which to pay attention. Originally, that there were blindfolds covering their sensitive eyes, but without exchanging any words, out of Jaromir's fear of giving rise to even a peep, and Ulia's doubt that she couldn't, in fact, still speak, that her vocal cords did work, since they were so chafed and sore, post-surgically tender even, the impression of the 10 fingers formally wrapped around her neck like they never let go. The two youths had managed to wrestle each other's eye covering off by rubbing, smushing, and dragging their faces across the other's nearby shoulder, eventually popping the elastic banded mask off from the top of their heads, opening up their eyes to an uncompromising darkness which felt like a new and wholly more engulfing kind of light, an unparalleled source of brightness. This is not the end, the clock shouts, spitting gunpowder and broken strips of wood from her mouth, erected out of which a discharged bright lime dodo bird hangs upside down on a wooden shuttle, its beak blown off by the shotgun blast from Jaromir's house, from where the clock was taken. The end is not the end. Leaking fragments of wood and liquidized seepages of splinters, the time-teller narrates from what can be gathered, either a scene entirely removed and unrelated from the one going on in the truck, a scene in her head occurring as is because the grandfather clock is dying a slow, anguishing death, or a scene going on right at this very moment in front of her involving Jaromir and Ulia, but one cloaked behind the impenetrably ironclad shield of base reality, which uses subterfuge and familiarity to confuse its victims from the moment they wake to the moment they pass. More than 50 times, Ulia has spoke the words, "My name is Ulia," and Jaromir has equaled her, responding, "Mine's Jaromir," and they say these names as if they are on the verge of forgetting them and needing to hold on to them. Their crying seems to have exhausted itself. An hour ago, or even less than that, if the radio is being played by other drivers out on the road tonight at stoplights, if the engines of trucks like these and rigged to sound like some kind of diesel-powered monstrosity weren't so loud, and if, in general, people out there on their own at this hour of the night listened with a little more rapt attention to the sounds of the moving world, they would have heard, underneath the American flag cover, a kind of water flow of tears, unself-conscious crying, hacking and spitting sputum, and this would have been a sound in a quieter world, which would then outspread like a sonic blanket over the far reaches of this part of the country. But because conditions were different, because the walls put up by neighbors and other night travelers are high and stolid, no one heard the sound of their crying except themselves, which is a torturous and vindictive kind of crying, that it just continued on like that, regardless, their frail young bodies and spastically impressionable heads behaving like an echo chamber for their worst moments and fears. The daily or hourly reserve of tears arid and empty, and they are left now, the two of them, to make what they will of the sniffles, the snotless, tearless, drippy feeling in the nostrils, and the urge to inhale. But breathing right now is almost so malodorously revolting that the urge to refrain from inhaling altogether, to keep the cooped-up air in which they're stifled, the smell of desiccation, the smell of torched wood, the chemical graininess of gunpowder, and their own self-marinating sweat, so offensive, almost awful-like in its combined stench. Yaramir's father often smacked him hard across the face, cutting his father's own hand on Yaramir's exposed teeth in the process, all because he sniffled too much, breathed too huffingly, sniffled too much, too loudly, too much, too annoyingly, and especially when the news was on or the ball game hung in the limbo of the ninth inning and the balance of life for his father and for fathers and for fatherhood and for mothers watching from a distance. All those materno-paternal diagnostics hung piteously from the ledge built and created to fall and crumble. And the volume of their television, which was a shitty television that sometimes made noises like trouble-mucking air conditioners, with a body part spinning inside of it, being grinded and pulped by the blades, could only be turned up so loud, and loud wasn't even the right word, and come on, Jaramir, he's remembering these words now, sniffling by himself, in a delivering liberation in which sniffles are not just allowed but considered rebellious, a snotty and mucus-focused revolt, an active 6-year-old courage for which he should and needs to be proud, needs to understand that he can be proud of himself, love himself, because if he does not learn this now, he never will. Come on, Yaramir, the world doesn't revolve around you, and the world doesn't revolve around you, and the fat goddamn Jew knows your mother and the laughs that she fucks gave you. You are the damaged lot, the clock continues. Septuagint eruption decrees you as born tabula rasa into a hell without fire where you cannot burn but feel less, but cower. Jumping. Yaramir and Ulia aren't merely physically bruised, they are bruises. They are black and blue contusions who are no longer capable of tears or weakness no matter how much they want to give in to either. They have been robbed of very basic human indulgences, vanished and disappeared from the world whose pictures from their earliest birthdays are soon to be posted on the morning news besides incongruously cheery-looking anchors with perfect teeth and velvet-smooth diction. And they, Yaramir and Ulia, rock from side to side like named animals so that their shoulders at least touch, and underneath their backs, sore from twisting and bending, wounded from being grabbed and thrown, scratched from serrated bits of stone and the crumbly dust beneath them, dirt crumbles against the hard polymer surface of the truck's bed, each clump of dirt puffing in a small gaseous combustion. If their hands cannot grasp one another's, they want to, at the bare minimum, feel a human contact, even if that sense of bodily abrasion and connection is reduced to the rubbing of restrained shoulders, two wingless insects rubbing the other's body for the sole purpose of music, blind union, the ghastly form of physic and totally unneat art called human bonding and amid so much sadness, the valence exchange of the uncontrollable chemistry of common fear and fright, the single most severe gravity of messages addressed to no one and to a world incapable of hearing them, and a sleep world, an away world, a deaf world, a world whose losses are too great to count two little kids being carted away through the shiftless desert. Touch me, Yaramir is struggling to spit out. Make me feel something, Ulia is trying to say. Remind me I am not alone. Go, the grandfather clock rails aloud, all stentorian and zero tack. You are a bridge, not a creature. You cruise atop your throughways in sundered paradise for something improved. You are grander than you are. The clock named Grandma shouts at full steam and hysteria, and Yaramir and Ulia feel as if they're being spoken to directly. Feel as if this grandma named grandfather clock had arms that it or she would reach over and maybe not untie them, but at least swath and embrace them, and shout at them like she is now. Go, the grandfather clock shrieks. Go, because if not, you are gone. Go, go, go. Thank you.